At this point, it's clear that every effort is being made from family and law enforcement to get Nancy home. But there were 4 things that stuck out to the former agent who spoke to me after he watched Savannah's message.
I can break a little news on your program here that I spoke with a detective earlier today, and effective Monday, this investigation will essentially be moved to the task force entirely.
50 days, no arrest, no named suspect, no confirmed break made public. On the night of February 1st, 2025, at some point between 10 p.m. and the early hours of the morning, an 84-year-old woman named Nancy Guthrie was taken from her home at 5447 East Calle Elegante in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. She had spent that Saturday evening with her family. Dinner, card games, laughter. She went home. And sometime after that, in the dark, in her own house, in the neighborhood she had lived in for 50 years, someone came in and took her. 41 minutes. That is how long investigators believe the suspect was inside that home. 41 minutes. And then Nancy was gone. Tonight, we are going to go through every single piece of confirmed evidence, every flagged date, every behavioral pattern, and every investigative thread that is actively being pulled right now. Because when you see how they all connect, you will understand exactly why investigators believe this case is closer to breaking than it has ever been. Stay with me. January 11th, 2025. A Sunday. Doorbell camera footage captures a figure approaching Nancy Guthrie's property. No backpack, no visible equipment. The suspect studies the camera position, assesses the entrance, and leaves without making contact. This is now believed to be the first documented surveillance visit, 3 weeks before the abduction. January 24th, 2025. A Saturday. Investigators have flagged this date as significant, though full details of what occurred on this date have not been publicly confirmed. It falls precisely between the first documented visit and the night of the abduction, February 1st, 2025. Late Saturday night into Sunday morning, the suspect returns. This time, everything is different. Mask properly fitted, firearm holstered at the hip, a fully loaded backpack, the contents of which have not been publicly disclosed. The suspect enters the property. 41 minutes later, Nancy Guthrie is gone. Her family reports that her pacemaker, which transmits location and cardiac data, went completely silent on the night of February 1st. Not irregular, not weakened, silent. In the 50 days since, no credible proof of life has emerged. Not a phone call, not a photograph, not a single verified communication confirming Nancy Guthrie is alive. Now, look at those 3 dates again. January 11th, Sunday, January 24th, Saturday, February 1st, Sunday. Every single date the FBI has flagged as significant in this entire investigation falls on a weekend. Not a Tuesday, not a Thursday morning. Every time, a weekend. That is not coincidence. In criminal behavioral analysis, that is a pattern. And patterns reflect the structure of the offender's regular life. On day 50, March 22, 2025, the Guthrie family broke weeks of silence. Not through a press conference, not through social media, through a single written statement released exclusively to Tucson's local NBC affiliate, KVOA, and approved word by the FBI before it was made public. In an active federal kidnapping investigation at this stage, family statements are not emotional releases. They are operational documents, every phrase reviewed, every word deliberate. Nothing clears federal approval without a purpose. News Nation senior investigative reporter Brian Enton, who has been on the ground in Tucson since February 3, 2025, just 2 days after the abduction, analyzed the statement publicly and was unambiguous. Nothing in this statement is accidental. The sentence that stopped every investigative reporter and law enforcement analyst covering this case: we continue to believe it is Tucson and the greater southern Arizona community that holds the key to finding resolution in this case. Tucsonans, not a stranger passing through on Interstate 10, not someone who flew in from another state and targeted this neighborhood remotely. Tucsonans, people with daily familiarity with those streets, people whose presence in the Catalina foothills raises no questions because they belong to that geography. Anton confirmed this matches what his law enforcement sources inside the Joint Task Force have been telling him since the earliest days of the investigation. The institutional belief, present from nearly the beginning, is that whoever took Nancy Guthrie is local, from Tucson, possibly from that specific neighborhood or the streets immediately surrounding East Calle Elegante. For 50 days, that belief was kept inside the investigation. On day 50, the family said it publicly, in language the FBI helped construct. The statement also referenced, for the first time publicly, the late evening of January 11th, not just the date, but the specific time of day. Anton's sources indicate the doorbell camera images showing the suspect without a backpack, visually distinct from the February 1st footage, may correspond to that specific evening. This establishes a documented surveillance window beginning 3 weeks before the abduction and anchors the first visit to a specific night. This week, former detective and state trooper Morgan Wright, with decades of behavioral analysis experience, sat down with Brian Enton and used a term that comes directly from criminal profiling methodology, a marauder. In behavioral profiling, a marauder is a defined offender category with specific documented characteristics. A marauder operates from a fixed home base. They range outward to commit offenses, and they return. They are not transients. They are not travelers. They live in proximity to their target, close enough to conduct reconnaissance across multiple visits, close enough to abort and return without significant logistical cost, and close enough to develop the level of operational knowledge about a target's daily routines that this crime so clearly required. Wright went further. Based on 3 specific factors, the suspect's clothing that night, his apparent need to move quickly after the abduction, and the physical geography of the Catalina foothills, Wright assessed the abductor's base of operations as likely pointing toward South Tucson. The Santa Catalina Mountains sit immediately to the north of Nancy's neighborhood. Moving north after an abduction means moving into difficult terrain with limited exit corridors. Moving south means open, accessible routes, away from surveillance-heavy areas, toward a population center where an individual can disappear into ordinary residential life without attracting attention. South Tucson, named publicly, by someone with the professional credentials to say it credibly. Now combine that behavioral profile with the weekend pattern. Someone operating as a marauder from a South Tucson base who visited the Catalina foothills on Sunday, January 11th, returned on Saturday, January 24th, and executed the abduction on the night of Saturday to Sunday, February 1st. That is someone with a structured weekday life, a job, a routine, obligations that run Monday through Friday, and weekends available to surveil, to plan, to return, and finally to act. On March 20th, 2025, the Pima County Sheriff's Department confirmed to Fox News Digital that detectives are actively evaluating reports of suspicious activity connected to a vacant property immediately adjacent to Nancy Guthrie's home. Retired Pima County SWAT Commander Bob Chiari spoke to Parade magazine and laid out exactly why this property matters. A vacant house in that specific location, physically adjacent to Nancy's property, could have served as a staging location for extended pre-abduction surveillance. It provides a presence on the street that requires no explanation. It gives a physical position, feet from Nancy's home, from which to observe her daily patterns across multiple weeks, which nights her lights went out early, which nights her driveway was empty, which nights she was completely and verifiably alone. Chiari was more specific than that. A vacant property like this could also be used to install concealed surveillance equipment inside the structure, positioned to monitor activity on the street or at adjacent properties with zero visible external footprint. No car at the curb, no figure in a yard, just a dark house that nobody questions, because vacant houses are unremarkable. Brian Enton confirmed that the FBI is asking specific questions about a neighbor who moved out of that street before Nancy disappeared and was subsequently seen returning to the neighborhood after her disappearance, not relocating and establishing a new life elsewhere, moving away and coming back. Nancy's neighbor of 30 years, Aldine Meister, gave investigators the most direct account of how this came to their attention. She told them, on the record, "The neighbors on the other side of me moved out. I wanted them to check that house. The FBI heard her. They went back to that property, and that investigation is now active." At the same time, the FBI is executing a request that reveals exactly how specifically their investigative theory is focused. They are requesting the full name of every single contractor and every individual worker on multiple construction sites in the neighborhood surrounding Nancy's property on East Calle Elegante, specifically during January 2025. Not general company records, not project documentation, individual names. Every person with a physical presence on those sites during that window. Former FBI agent Steve Moore explained the operational logic directly. Someone with daily, legal, unremarkable access to a residential street during January would have possessed something that cannot be manufactured quickly and cannot be fabricated from a distance. Invisibility through familiarity. A work crew on a residential block becomes part of the visual background within days. Neighbors stop registering their presence. A person in work clothes and a hard hat on that street has a permanent, unquestioned cover story for being exactly where they are. From that position, across days and weeks of daily presence, someone with a surveillance objective could have documented which vehicles belong to which property, the precise timing of Nancy's daily movements, the location and apparent operational status of every security camera on the street, which homes have dogs, which have regular evening visitors which go dark early, and which one houses an 84-year-old woman who lives alone. The FBI does not need that construction worker to be the person who wore the mask on February 1st. They simply need them to have been in a position to observe, and to have passed what they observed to someone who used it. Every name on those construction rosters is also a potential DNA comparison point. And that is where this investigation is now pointing with the most precision it has shown at any stage. Foreign DNA was recovered from inside Nancy Guthrie's home, genetic material not belonging to her, not connected to anyone with regular authorized access to that property. A complex mixed profile, meaning more than one contributor, currently being processed at a private forensic laboratory in Florida. Forensic genetic genealogy has been formally initiated on that sample. This is the exact methodology that identified Joseph James D'Angelo, the Golden State Killer, in April 2018, after more than 4 decades of investigation and over 50 known victims. It is the same technique that identified Brian Kohberger in the University of Idaho murders in December 2022, within weeks of the crime. The process does not require the suspect to exist in any law enforcement database. It does not require a prior arrest. It does not require previous DNA submission of any kind. It requires one connection, one distant relative, anywhere in the United States, who voluntarily submitted their genetic profile to a consumer platform, GEDmatch, 23andMe, Ancestry DNA. From that single partial match, investigators build a family tree outward, identifying relatives, narrowing branches, eliminating candidates, until the tree converges on a name. Forensic expert April Stonehouse confirmed that processing of the available samples has been moving rapidly. Retired FBI agent Jennifer Coffindaffer told Newsweek the case is, in her words, red hot behind the scenes, with more active investigative leads than most comparable cases generate at this stage. If the abductor is from Tucson, if they visited the property on the evening of January 11th, if they spent time inside the vacant adjacent house during the surveillance period, if they worked a construction site on East Calle Elegante or the surrounding streets during January 2025, then their DNA is not only potentially present inside Nancy's home from the night of February 1st. Their genetic material may be on surfaces contacted during the weeks of surveillance visits that came before. A gate latch, a utility box, which investigators have already flagged as vandalized near the property, with that vandalism now part of the active investigation. A surface casually touched during reconnaissance on a Sunday evening in January, when nobody was looking for forensic evidence yet. Every name the FBI is collecting from those construction rosters is a comparison candidate. Every former resident of that street is a potential match. And in 2026, with the genealogy database populations that currently exist, the probability that any individual in the United States has 0 relatives who have ever submitted a DNA sample to any consumer platform approaches 0. The tree will build. The question is only how long it takes. Forensic behavioral expert Brant Smith raised something this week that deserves to be heard clearly. In cases of this type and this profile, suspects frequently return to the crime scene after the fact. This is the type of person who could come back to the memorial that has grown outside Nancy's home on East Calle Elegante, who could stand among the people leaving flowers and candles, who could take photographs of the tribute, who could watch the vigils from within the crowd of mourners, who could observe the news coverage and the public response from a position of apparent normalcy, surrounded by people who are grieving and feel something that drives them back there. Brian Enton stated this directly on broadcast. It is possible the suspect has already appeared in footage filmed outside Nancy's house during public memorial events. This is documented behavior in comparable cases. It is not speculative. Investigators have been watching every person who visited that memorial, filming, cataloging, comparing faces against known persons of interest. Every single person. In a local Tucson radio interview this week, notably more candid than anything said in any national media appearance, the Pima County Sheriff said something worth noting exactly. Yes, I know a lot, but I am not going to share that with the public. It is about protecting the integrity of the investigation. He knows something specific. The FBI knows something specific. And the DNA currently being processed in that Florida laboratory may be the mechanism that converts what they know from investigative intelligence into courtroom-ready evidence. There is one section of the Day 50 family statement that most coverage overlooked, but that may be the most significant thing the Guthrie family has said publicly since February 1st. They wrote that they want to celebrate Nancy's life, but they cannot do that until she is brought to a final place of rest, not until she comes home. Not until she walks back through the door of the house she lived in for 50 years. A final place of rest. That is a family that has been living for 50 days with the full weight of what the evidence and the passage of time are telling them about an 84-year-old woman whose pacemaker went silent on the night of February 1st and from whom no proof of life has emerged in nearly 2 months. And then they wrote, "We cannot grieve. We can only ache and wonder." Those words were approved by the FBI, every word chosen deliberately, and they describe exactly what it looks like to love someone and not know where they are. Nancy Guthrie, 84 years old, 50 years in that community, taken on the night of February 1st, 2025, from her own home on East Calle Elegante in the Catalina Foothills neighborhood of Tucson, Arizona. The Guthrie family pointed directly at the Tucson community in a federal-approved statement. A former detective named South Tucson as the likely base of operations. A vacant house adjacent to her property is under active investigation as a staging location. A neighbor who left that street before the abduction kept coming back after it. Every flagged date falls on a weekend. DNA is in active processing. Forensic genetic genealogy has been initiated, and the sheriff says he knows things he cannot yet share. This case is not cold, it is not stalled. It is narrowing, methodically, deliberately, toward one area, one neighborhood, and one person who has been maintaining the appearance of an ordinary life in a city they call home. If you are in Tucson and you know someone whose behavior changed in the days around February 1st, 2025, if you noticed a vehicle near the Catalina Foothills on January 11th or January 24th, if you worked construction in that area during January and saw something that didn't sit right, if you know someone who seemed different after this story broke, make the call tonight. FBI Tip Line, 1-800-CALL-FBI. That's 1-800-225-5324. Online tips, tips.fbi.gov, Pima County Sheriff's Department, 5203-514-900. Everything is completely anonymous. The reward stands at over $1 million. Nancy Guthrie deserves to come home.